Hey there, friends, polymaths, students, teachers, School of Tomorrow. So I'm going to go through this slideshow again. I'm going to go a little faster than usual. It often takes me like 45 minutes to do this, and there's no reason it can't be snappier. It's about kind of a fork in the road, and I like to use the word fork in a GitHub sense or Git sense of in software we can just decide to go off in another direction and pioneer new features and then decide whether we want to merge back into main. And Synergetics is such a fork. It's a fork off into a more tetrahedral way of thinking. You've seen my, CPP ball packing, sorry, CCP. This is math jargon. Bucky had his own thing, IVM, in place of our very familiar from school XYZ, which is all filling space with cubes, right? So basically, synergetics is what would civilization be like if way back in Greek times they'd been more enamored of the tetrahedron than they were? Like, what would life have been like by now? And to get the ball rolling, you have to establish that there is a fork in the road at all. And I use this slide to show how there is a contradiction in synergetics, apparently. How is it that we manage to have a cube of volume 3 surrounding this reference tetrahedron of edges 2 radii or 1 diameter? Either way, you get an irrational edge length. And so either way, you don't have a volume of 3 because square root of 2 times itself is never going to be 3, nor is square root of 2 over 2 going to be 3. So it seems like he's just okay from there. He's left reality and he's off in a crazy world. But of course, mathematics isn't quite like that. Here's again where I'm saying a third of the cube of square root of 2 is not going to be an edge of 1, right? How do you get this relationship that he's talking about? 2r equals 1d. Is he gone crazy here? I add that as a possibility. Is it crazy? Is it a useful namespace or crazy? And this is what drove Kenneth Snelson crazy at Black Mountain College. He was the inventor of tensegrity. Except the word, Bucky came in with the word, and that kind of, the word tensegrity for intention and integrity and stuff like that. It's a well known story, and I knew Kenneth, right? I was his friend, and I was also steeped in the Bucky stuff. And he felt somewhat that he'd been left to make the assessment as a young guy who didn't have a lot of experience. He was kind of under pressure from Bucky to be almost like his protege. And, what is this guy? Is he who he says he is? Is he like some messiah type or what? And I think this was very hard on Kenneth to have this assessment just left to him. Other people would make snarky remarks about Bucky. It's like you can get into his character and his girlfriends, and you can talk about everything irrelevant except whether Synergetics itself holds any water. And the point of this slideshow is to suggest that as we get into it, that it does hold water, and the concentric hierarchy, which is a set of polyhedrons arranged around one another, getting bigger and bigger, out to like 20 for this guy, the cuboctahedron. That volume 3 cube, right? It's part of it. It's bigger than I'm showing you. The relative sizes here aren't quite correct, right? But there's a rhombic dodecahedron, a volume 6, and all this stuff. Very memorable. It like packages a whole lot of geometric relationships into a very dense, easily memorable package because of the whole number of volumes that are in there. Not that there's not irrational, there's other volumes too. It's a dense little cute, hard-edged gemstone of a brilliant contribution to philosophy, and it's kind of left to him to work out the consequences, partly because he didn't publish it in its full glory until towards the end of his life, and I think he had good reasons for that. He wanted his track record well established. He was a man of many honorary degrees, awards, you know, if you looked at his resume, you would be impressed. Nowadays, it's popular for journalists to say Bucky Fuller was a failure. But if you look at the resume and say to yourself, oh, what a failure, you're going to feel like an idiot, I think. It's not that he was a failure, but he may have been a failure in that we're ready to discard his fork and not try to merge any parts of it back. This tetrahedron based way of thinking, there's room for it in mathematics. Mathematics has no trouble with different beginnings. And in fact, it's like sandcastles on the beach. They're all allowed to be there, right? And math is not looking for a king of the hill, really. But when you posit something so basic as a different way of talking about the dimensionality of space, instead of saying it's three dimensional, you go with four for some reason, and he talks you into it. It's unsettling if you think, oh no, there's only one way it can be. Language, what math provides, the security of math, is that it narrows it down to one logic and one only. And that's, kind of the edifice that we build on. And then civilization and its pretensions to eternity have to do with the everlasting truth of its foundations. But what about multiple foundations, multiple civilizations, coexisting or existing serially through time, which is how it has been, by the way. There's no one sort of foundation to all cultures in the logical world. So here we have a different one, somewhat, right? But also very familiar. There's no great departure, and that's why it's easy enough to merge a lot of stuff back in, like studies of space-filling tetrahedra, which Somerville took up. It's a common topic in mathematics. Now that we have the synergetics vocabulary, we have the option to go over that same material with some different words and some different associations if we want to. This guy is a space filler, not a tetrahedron, but has unit volume in synergetics. So-called coupler. When you develop a coupler is you take a cube and you pop out one of its face to center half octahedra, but that is not of a regular octahedron, right? The edges up to the apex are of a different length than the edges around the edge, around the side. Just getting two of them. So there's our coupler, right? And obviously it's a space filler because we got it from the cube, so this would just be part of the next cube and so on. And then you can, if you turn all the couplers around, you'll get a rhombic dodecahedron of volume 6 on the cube's face, that is. If you take this volume 3 cube and stick couplers on the faces, then obviously you've distributed 6 couplers, which would be a volume of 3, and it started at 3. This cube has a volume of 3 in synergetics, so our rhombic dodecahedron is 6, and inside each rhombic dodecahedron is one ball of the cubic closest packing, or CCP. And when you connect all those neighboring centers together, you get the scaffolding Fuller calls the IVM, or isotropic vector matrix. So he had volumes of 1, 3, 4. Where's volume 5 in this picture? And that was a quest for him to find a volume 5. And he came out with some interesting findings. There's a hairline fracture we can take you on kind of as a tour. And my proposal is precisely that as a tour guide, we'll take you into all of this, but we're kind of in a cave in literature. Remember, Edgar Allan Poe wrote Eureka. Well, Fuller is an American transcendentalist who came up with this gemstone of a math that we can take you on a tour of in the context of exploring American literature, science fiction, futurism. He has a lot of contemporaries that are interesting, some of whom he corresponded with or made co-appearances with, like Marshall McLuhan. So through Bucky's life story, we have like a great key into the whole 20th century scenario. That's one thing we get. But beyond that, we get something that computer graphics people can go crazy with, and there's a lot of greenfield development ahead because this area is not currently well supported. People don't know what I'm talking about. So you have the ability to join the team that's merging that fork back into main. We're taking things that we've found, low hanging fruit, you might call it, in Synergetics, and bringing it back to mainstream. And a big contribution here was this little algorithm, familiar to those who've studied volume formula for the tetrahedron. We've got those in history, but this one we don't have any square root of 144, 122, whatever. It's a little bit different, and it gives back native tetravolume volume. In other words, starting with this edge 1 unit tetrahedron, volume 1, and this volume 6 dodecahedron, and so forth. By the way, the long diagonals are what's the same there. Starting in that world, everything has a tetravolume, right? Just like everything has a cubic volume. And you can establish a relationship called the Synergetics constant, 1.06066, and so forth. So again, not well-known stuff. You can go through universities, most universities in the US right now, and not get a hint of any of this stuff. You can go to high school right now and sit for hours and hours through your high school class and get 000 of this material with all of its connections to online encyclopedia of integer sequences, its endorsement from MIT and Harvard kind of guy, Arthur Loeb, the connections to history, to Alexander Graham Bell. I mean, to not teach this material, honestly, I think is outright malpractice. But we don't have any professional standards that say you have to pass an exam in any part of Synergetics whatsoever to demonstrate competence in your field. There is no such cabal that's able to enforce that, right? So instead, we just leave it up to the laymen, the lay people, to decide, was this something to ignore? Shouldn't there have been some merging work going on? And now that you've seen some of it, i.e., through my work, shouldn't you be seeing a lot more of it and not just wait for me, right? Because I'm a man of limited talent, right? I'm good at what I do, but there's a lot I don't do. We've got the quadratic coordinates. It's like there's a lot of material here for people to work with. And I'm kind of a cheerleader saying, hey, if I can do it, you can do it. And start merging back some of this very promising content in Synergetics into the mainstream, realizing you're not breaking math, you're not challenging math, you just need to make room for it. And that means you have to go along with Coxeter and make a sharp distinction between different uses of the 4D meme, which was all over the place in the early 1900s. By the time we get to the end of the 1900s, really we have 4D as time plus 3D, which is the relativity view, the Einstein use of the term. And then we have n-dimensional space of machine learning and polytopes and so forth, linear algebra, and then this 4D as the minimum shape, tetrahedron, that only comes out in the 70s with Bucky, and it's precisely that fork in the road that I'm saying we haven't worked on to merge back. But there is a logic to it. It goes down to the triangle, and we can create a fun story out of it if we want to teach it to younger people, maybe at high school, where the Martians use this math. And they come to Earth, and they're all keen to build something with the humans. It's a constructive story. They want to make a hydropower dam. And this is supposed to show one of those concrete holding buckets that goes out over the dam as they gradually fill it. I know it's not a great picture. You wouldn't necessarily know what you're looking at. And the Martians over here are psychologically all tetrahedron oriented, as in Synergetics, because this is a thin veil or wrapper around some of that Synergetics. And here's the Earthlings. And the Earthling kids, in order to work with the Martians, have to go to school to learn to think like a Martian. So we kind of tell a story of, okay, Earthlings, you've had your XYZ math, you've had your high school math. Now imagine encountering this other civilization and look at what their math is like. And it's going to reinforce your Earthling math when you come back to XYZ, more aware of how it's all working. Just like if you work in Linux for a while, you get smarter in Windows, kind of. So yeah, volume one tetrahedron, how to teach it, how to integrate it, how to merge it back into everyday conversation. At the same time, let people know that one of the great countercultural figures, a troublemaker really, someone who raised a lot of questions about our civilization and said the only way to get the world to work for everybody is to be highly disruptive, right? It's like our legal system, everything, all our institutions are built on thousands and thousands of years of devastating scarcity and never going to have enough. You got to justify that, first of all. You got to have all kinds of theology about that, kind of like they used to justify slavery with theology and the Bible and all this. It's like whatever the status quo is, if it looks unchangeable, your first thing is to justify it. And so Fuller's coming along with the world could work. We actually have technology now that we could have abundance. And that is so threatening, right? And I think it goes with the open source movement, free open source, and the design science revolution. They go together, right? I think that was disruptive too. And yet, look how industry relies on the products of open source technology. Look how industry relies on geodesic domes. Look how Synergetics is already helping us, I would say. Just look for ways. Look at octet trusses. Find out what those are and see if you can find them in architecture and so forth. Now, there's a lot of ways to work Synergetics into the mainstream. I've got Carl Menger, Geometry of Lumps, Darcy Thompson, Letter to Bertrand Russell, all this, make it easy for you, right? That's why this slideshow is here. I'm showing you that it's really a no-brainer. And this is the box that math people have gotten themselves into. It's like they haven't touched this stuff for 40 years hardly. What's changed? Why would they suddenly do it now? So they've dug themselves into a hole. They don't want to admit that they should have, given this stuff another look earlier than now. So let's just justify the status quo again. Let's just go on ahead blindly and forget about merging. Well, that's only a few people are going to be diehards for that. And the rest of them are open to persuasion. So I'm persuading people who are kind of on the fence to join us in the army of merging this stuff into the mainstream because it's mature and ready to do that and has been for a long time. And let those who are defensive about why they don't do that, let them be defensive and let them counterattack with their soap operas about Bucky's life or whatever. It's a lot of character stuff, which I think we're in a mature world somewhat beyond in the case of Bucky by now. So I wouldn't allow biographies of Bucky in the future to be relevant to this discussion. It's not about if he was a good person. He was very disruptive, actually. And we'll leave it at that, okay? So how quixotic is Synergetics? Well, that depends on how you try to defend it or the strategies you use to take it forward. Now, I had help from Jay Baldwin and Ed Applewhite and luminaries of this nature, and they were very professional and competent in what they did and how they did it. So I learned a lot from them. And so, from my point of view, there's no way that this army of merge is going to lose. Like, we're making so much headway already. So just think about that, and how would you like to play a role? Looking forward. Talk to you soon.